Weaknesses in Paul? Would you like today, my beloved, that we leave aside the high qualities of Paul, all that in him commands our admiration, to deal in broad daylight with what, in the eyes of some, offers a hold on him? We will see, as well, that these aspects are just as appropriate to confer on it, in their turn, brilliance and grandeur. What, then, offers a hold to critics in him? We have seen him, you will say, fear blows so and so. Yes, it is true. Thus when they made him present his back to the thongs of the whip. It's not the only time. There was also, in the episode of the purple seller, his attitude when he made trouble for his release from prison. The only goal he had in doing so was to secure guarantees and avoid falling quickly into the same trouble. Well, what about all this? This account, more than anything, shows how great and worthy of admiration he is. It is that with a temperament like his, which has nothing reckless about it, which ignores all mad bravado, with a body like his, which recoils before blows and which the whip makes tremble, he has shown, when circumstances demanded it, with as much disdain as the incorporeal powers towards all that passes for formidable. When you see him all contracted, all trembling, remember the famous words that make him a follower of the angels, who finds access to heaven, who will separate us from the love of Christ. The tribulation, the anguish, the persecution, the hunger, the danger, the sword. Remember his no less famous words, when he counted all these trials as nothing. The slight tribulation which has come upon us for a moment is building us, far beyond measure, into an eternal mass of glory, to us who do not look at visible things but at invisible things. Add to that the daily tribulations, the death 1,000 times faced daily, and think of all these trials to admire it, and also to no longer despair of yourselves. Finitude and human will. The fear of blows. Because it is precisely this apparent weakness of our nature, it is this which is the most masterful proof of his merit. Since it is without escaping the constraints which weigh on ordinary men that he supported such assertions. The mass of perils he faced might have led one to suspect, indeed, and perhaps one might have suspected, that he had to escape our common condition to express what he has just said. But if all the trials through which he passed were permitted, it is to teach you that if his nature made him a man among so many others, the ardor which animated him not only elevated him above all, but made him the equal of the angels. He was a good man, both in soul and in body, when he endured 1,000 deaths and despised all the vicissitudes, present and to come. But it is this ardor which allowed him to make these extraordinary and incredible affirmations heard for many. I would like to be an object of curse, separated from Christ, for my brothers, those of my race according to the flesh. Yes, we could overcome any kind of anxiety inherent in our nature, by dint of energy, it would be enough to want it. And nothing is impossible for man from what Christ has commanded him. Let us not lose sight of the capital of energy which can be ours, and God, on his side, will put in us an increase in strength which will make the scales tip considerably. Then, however perils may descend on us, we will not be their prey. The fear of blows is far from being reprehensible. What is, rather, is to resign oneself, for fear of blows, to behavior that would flout our duties to God. And therefore it is more just to admire someone who fears blows in combat without being reduced rather than a person who feels no fear. It is then, in fact, that the role of the will is brought into full light. To fear blows is natural, but not to resign oneself to anything shocking under the influence of fear. Here is the mark of a will that corrects the weaknesses of nature and triumphs over its fragility. One is not guilty for being a prey to pain, but rather for being moved by it to words or actions that do not please God. If I had said that Paul was not a human creature, you would have been right to put forward the weaknesses of our nature to thereby refute my reasoning. But if I tell you and firmly repeat to you that he was a man like the others, that he was not of a superior nature to ours, but that he prevailed by his will, your objection falls to flat. What am I saying? It turns in favor of Paul. For that amounts to showing his greatness. Since while belonging to the human condition he has surpassed it. And it's not just exalting him, but it's demeaning the cackle of people who let themselves be defeated once and for all, forbidding them to have recourse to this loophole. Paul would have been endowed with a nature superior to ours, is to urge them, on the contrary, to have recourse to this élan which finds its source in the will. The fear of death. But, you will say, it happened to him, too, to fear death. Yes, and that too is in our nature. But it is still him, he who feared death, who declares on the other hand, we who are in this tent we groan overwhelmed, or, we groan, we too, interiorly. You see how he counterbalanced the fragility of nature by the force he opposed to it thanks to his will. Time and time again, already, the martyrs, at the moment of being led to death, became livid. So filled were they with fear and anguish. But this is precisely what makes them admirable. With this fear they had of death, for Christ they did not flee from death. Paul, likewise, feared death in vain. He did not seek in the least to escape Gehenna for Christ's sake, and he who trembled before the end, sought to leave this world. This behavior is not unique to Paul. The chief apostle, who often declared that he was ready to lay down his life, had a deep fear of death. Listen, for example, to the words that Christ addresses to him on this subject. When you grow old, they will tie your belt and lead you where you do not want. By this he was aiming at the failure of nature, not that of his will. Nature manifests its tendencies, even against our will, and we cannot overcome our shortcomings, even if we put all our will and energy into it. This can in no way earn us recriminations. And it is rather what should nourish admiration. Yes, should we be blamed for fearing death? Shouldn't we, on the other hand, be congratulated for not resigning ourselves, despite our fear, to anything vile? It is not our nature that should be blamed for these weaknesses, it is our bondage to them. Thus, to stand up after the assaults that our nature delivers to us, thanks to the energy of our will, here is what is to show greatness and which deserves admiration. This is to show all the power of the will, and to shut the mouth of those who lament, saying, why is courage not natural to us? But, I ask you, what does it matter whether it is natural or due to the action of the will? To what extent, however, is this better than that? Insofar as the action of the will makes it possible to win the crown, and makes merit appear in all its glory. But, you will say, what is firm is what is innate. I will answer you that a strong will is what is still more solid. Look at the martyrs, their bodies were pierced by the sword, nature had to yield to arms, but the will did not succumb. It was not confounded. Look at Abraham. Tell me, did not his will triumph over nature? When he was ordered to slay his son, did it not prove more powerful? Look at the 3 children. The case is the same. And don't you know that word of pagan wisdom, by dint of habit the will gives a second inheritance? I would even say, for my part, that the will is even the primary datum. As my remarks have shown for a while, and you can thus see that we can give ourselves a natural solidity by another means, provided that we have a strong will and in a habitual state of vigilance. And you also see that we reap more praise when moral qualities are the fruit of a choice, an act of the will and not a given that is binding on you. Ah, here is what is admirable, absolutely. I bruise my body and treat it as a slave. Ah, this is where its nobility fully shines. This is what brings my admiration to its height. It is not without difficulty, I see, that he reaches perfection, and, consequently, it is no longer possible for those who let themselves go to put forward I do not know what happy dispositions from which he would have been gifted him. Power of will. When he declares, I am crucified for the world, it is to his will that I give the price. Because we can, yes, we can very well, thanks to a rigorous will. Act exactly as if we got our strength from nature. If we look at this man in full light, exposing him as the very statue which represents perfect virtue, we will see that his ambition was to carry the qualities which he had given himself thanks to his will to the degree of solidity which is proper to innate tendencies. He suffered, to be sure, when he was struck, but he despised pain no less than if he had been one of the incorporeal creatures, who do not suffer, as can be seen from his words. They make believe that he was far from sharing our common condition. When he says, "The world is a crucified for me and I am a crucified for the world," or again, "And if I live, it is no longer I, but Christ who lives in me," what does he over there? That he left his own body, nothing less than that. And when he confides to us, "A thorn has been put in my flesh, an angel of Satan," what does that mean except that his suffering was limited to the physical realm, nothing less than that? We're not going to say that he was impervious to suffering, no, but he pushed it away. He chased it away thanks to his immense reserves of will. Is it not the same meaning that must be attributed to many other statements, even more astonishing, when he rejoices in being whipped, when he glories in his chains? What other meaning can be given to statements like this? "I bruise my body and I treat it as a slave, in fear that after having served as a herald for others, I myself will be put out of competition." They reveal the weakness of his nature, but by my reasoning, a strong will. All of this makes it possible to establish 2 points to be considered jointly. On the one hand, all these traits of greatness must not lead us to believe that he was of another nature than us and led us to despair, on the other hand, and vice versa, that all these weaknesses do lead us to condemn such a holy person. On the contrary, let us find their reasons to reject all despair and turn to firm hopes. The sense of balance. Violent Paul? All of this allows Paul to establish the role of divine grace, a contrario, and he does it superabundantly. Let's say rather, so as not to lead people to believe that nothing came from him. Generously. But he does not forget, however, to speak of his own energy, so as not to lead you to throw everything into the hands of God and sink into a deep sleep, to the point of snoring. Everywhere you will find in him a measure, a rule that he sets with great rigor. Perhaps, you will say, but he attacked the founder Alexander very harshly. Well, what does this example do? He didn't speak out of anger, but out of the pain he felt because of the truth. It was not for himself that he suffered, but because this man opposed the proclamation of the message. He is a bitter opponent of my preaching, he does not say, of myself. By launching his curses, he showed his attachment to the truth, but that's not all, he gave courage to his disciples. It was normal, in fact, that they were all offended when they saw those who flouted the word of God do so with impunity. This is the reason for his remarks. It has happened to him, you will tell me, to call down a chastisement on a few individuals, if it is just, in the eyes of God, to return the tribulation to those who inflict it on us, he says, warning. It's not that he wanted their Page 96 punishment, God forbid, it's that he never stopped giving courage to those who were flouted, and that's why he adds, and to restore to you, who undergo it, rest. And when it is he himself who suffers some inconvenience, listen to him, and see his wisdom in the way of responding to attacks. Insulted, we bless. Persecuted, we endure. Slandered, we console. And if you were going to claim that his words or his actions, when they had the interest of others as their end, were inspired by anger, now is the time or never to claim that it was also in anger that he crippled Elymas, or that Peter was the assassin, also in anger, of Ananias and Sapphira. But no one is crazy enough, stupid enough to support that. One thus finds many other words or acts which seem to be as many brutalities on his part, and which fully manifest, on the contrary, his kindness. When, for example, He abandons the incestuous Corinthian to Satan. It is the effect of great charity, of dispositions of tenderness, and this is what appears from the second letter as well. When he threatens the Jews by saying to them, "The wrath of God has taken them by surprise and will remain on them," it is not that he is overflowing with fury. You hear him, in any case, continually praying for them. He only wants to scare them and bring them back to more moderation. Good, you will say, but he insulted the high priest, throwing at him. It is God who is going to strike you. Whitewashed wall. Some, we know, wanting to justify this word, claim that it must be seen as a prophecy. I don't blame them for it. Things did indeed happen like that. He really died under the blows. But let's see, if one shows particularly strong hostility in an altercation with someone, it is superfluous, precisely, to respond to a remonstrance. I didn't know it was the high priest, and if it was a prophecy, why defend yourself with the same sentence? Let's say rather that we must see there a warning for others. A way of teaching them to address themselves with courtesy to the scribes and Pharisees, as Christ already did. He said all that can be said and all that cannot be said about the scribes and the Pharisees, while affirming, the scribes and the Pharisees occupy the chair of Moses. Therefore do and observe all that they can tell you. Thus, in this circumstance, Paul respected the dignity of the high priest at the same time as he foretold what was to happen. And if he cut off John from the community, he did so only with regard to the consequences for the preaching. Responsibility and firmness. When one takes responsibility for this ministry, in fact, one must beware of all softness and not be quick to let oneself down. It takes courage, energy, or else you will not get involved in such a magnificent task. If you are not able to go so far as to give your own life in exchange of death, of perils. Christ said it himself, "If anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself. Take up his cross and accompany me." To not have these dispositions is to betray others en masse. It would be better to remain calm, withdrawn into oneself, than to appear in front of everyone to receive a burden that exceeds your strength, because then you lose yourself, and the others with you, and they had trusted you. Isn't that a bit absurd? If you don't know the art of navigation, the way to fight against the waves, even supposing that a crowd of people forces you to do so, you won't go to the helm. And when it is a question of coming to proclaim the message, one would line up, lightly, haphazardly. One would inconsiderately accept a charge which puts you in contact with 1,000 dead. Neither the pilot of a ship, nor the gladiator who faces the beasts or the one who has chosen single combat, no one should put himself on a war footing, faced with the 1,000 opportunities to perish, to be massacred. Like the one who instructs the proclamation of the message. Here the perils are greater, like the adversaries more formidable, and one no longer gets massacred for I don't know what stake. It is heaven that is offered as a prize, while Gehenna is the lot reserved for those who fail. It is about the salvation or the perdition of the soul. And it is not only the preacher who must be thus on a war footing, it is the simple faithful, for it is to all, without exception, that the invitation is launched to take up his cross and to accompany Christ. And if it is addressed to everyone, it is with all the more reason for those who teach, for pastors, of which John, also called Mark, was a part. From then on, it is justice if he was cut off, because he had put himself in the front line of the phalanx and had behaved there like the last of the cowards. And if Paul sent him away, it was to prevent his lack of vigor from harming the energy of others. As for the dispute between them, according to Luke, see no grounds for accusation. It is not the argument that is unbearable, it is to indulge in it without reason and without foundation. Unjust anger will not be innocent. It is not just anger, but unjust anger. And what does Christ say? He who gets angry with his brother without a subject. As for the prophet, he affirms, get angry without falling into sin. If we cannot give rein to this passion, even when circumstances invite you to do so, what is the point of its presence in us? Nothing. It is useless. No, it is not, and if the Creator put it in us, it is to correct sinners, to awaken sleeping souls in weakness and in a state of resignation, to shake off the slumber of people who are dozing and in a state of relaxation. He has placed anger in our hearts like the blade of a sword. It is to use it, to find strength there, when necessary. Paul used it often. And his anger has something more endearing than soothing words, because all he did was with a sense of timeliness, and in the service of proclamation of the message. For mildness is simply not good. It depends on the circumstances, and if you take away the opportunity, mildness becomes cowardice, like anger impudent outburst. Oh, in developing this, my aim was not to defend Paul. He does without our speeches. It is that his glory comes to him not from men, but from God. No, my goal was to teach those who listen to me to make use of everything when necessary, as I said above, so we can take advantage of any circumstance. And with what riches we will go to the port sheltered from the storms, to receive there the immortal crowns. And may we all be counted worthy, with the grace and mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and the power, now and forever and ever. Amen.